Hey, this is Jamie at Stonemaier Games, and today I'm going to talk about a topic that's a little bit different than some of my game design top 10 style videos. Instead, today I'm going to talk about the 4 steps to think about, to consider, and to execute if you want to pitch your game to a publisher. Now, I have a separate video about how to design a tabletop game. It's like 10 steps to design a tabletop game. Watch that first. If you're looking to be a game designer, watch that video first. I'll link it in the description below. And there's also the option for you to simply self-publish the game, for you to start a publishing company, to maybe crowdfund on Kickstarter or GameFound or Game on Tabletop to crowdfund the initial print run for that game. Totally viable. That's a very different and much bigger task than what I'm going to describe to you today. And you can check out the blog at stonemeiergames.com for a lot more information about how to do that. Today, I'm going to focus specifically on how to pitch your game to a publisher from start to finish, if that is the pursuit that you want to go. So if you just want to focus on game design, if that's your passion, if you love game design, tabletop game design, and you want to pitch your game to a publisher and have them publish it and do all the other things that go along with it, there are many, many steps that follow the game design process. This video is for you. I'm going to use some of our games as an example, and I should mention here that I am talking to you about this from a publisher perspective. I am a game publisher. I have never actually submitted a game to a publisher. So I am lacking that expertise, but I have 10 years now of being a publisher, and most of those years we've been accepting submissions from other game designers. So that is the context with which I am approaching this video. So the first category, the first big step is preparation. And there are some subcategories here that I'll mention below. The first is to know the market. By this, I mean know what other games are out there. There's so many times where, and I've encountered this myself, where I think of an idea for a game and then I discover that that game already exists. And usually I feel relief when that happens because I'm like, okay, this game already exists. I can just go, this game that I was excited about, I can now just go play that game. It's already published. But also knowing the market means knowing what games are working, are popular, or people are talking about them right now. And a great place to do that is on Board Game Geek, boardgamegeek.com. That's the place to really see what people are talking about, what people are excited about, which games are highly rated, which games are not as well received. You can discover a lot of information there on Board Game Geek. You can jump into the discussions there. I'd also recommend following at least a few reviewers, written podcast and YouTube video reviewers. I have a list, I'll link to that in the description below, where it's an article I wrote that's geared towards game reviewers, but I have a long list of reviewers that you can discover on that list. Follow them. I mean, I follow hundreds and hundreds of reviewers because I like to learn about other games, both as a designer, and so I know what other games are out there. What games are people talking about that they like? What mechanisms do they like? Just knowing the market and knowing more about what's already out there and how it's being received, I think is critically important as you work on your game and as you work on your pitch itself. And also, of course, this goes back to the design video too, but play a lot of games. I think that's crucial. Like I don't think it behooves you to not play games if you are wanting to pitch your game to a publisher. I think it significantly increases the chances that the publisher will come back to you and say, oh, this game already exists, or this game already exists, or something similar, and it doesn't work. Like the market did not respond well to it. So that's why knowing the market, I think, is really, really important. Part 2 of preparation is to actually fully design the game. And that's where the other video that I mentioned comes in, the 10 steps to design a game. This does not mean just having an idea. It means actually having that idea, making the first prototype, playtesting it, realizing that it's terrible, and doing it again and again and again by yourself, and then with a local group, and then sending it to other people who can tell you what's wrong with the game, what's good about the game, what's fun, what's imbalanced, what's not intuitive, all those things that go into the game design process. Actually prototyping, iterating over and over again, and playtesting. Fully design the game, and I use the word unique here. Fully design a unique game. So make sure that it is a game that is different than what's already out there, whether it's different thematically, different mechanically, or has maybe it has the same theme of a game or games that are already out there, and maybe some same mechanisms of games that are already out there, but you put them together in a unique way that's unique to your specific game. I think that's really, really important. There are already plenty of games that exist, and so if you're going to spend a lot of your time on a game, make sure it's something new, make sure it's something unique. Part 3 of preparation is to make yourself and the game known on both online and at events, especially when it's a lot safer to go to events, hopefully post-pandemic. this I think is a huge way to get yourself out there. And this is more about you, I think, than the game, but sometimes it can be about the game itself. For example, I wanted to mention some of the games. So we have 5 games right now that were designed by other people, not me, that we published at Stillmar Games. And the first one was Between Two Cities from Ben Rossett and Matthew O'Malley. I had met Ben at a convention called Geekway to the West in St. Louis. I had played some games with him. I had a great time with Ben. I could tell he was really sharp. I liked the way he talked about game design. And I ran into him and his design partner, Matthew, at Gen Con, I believe a few months later, maybe a year later. And I asked them if they were working on anything, and they mentioned that they had this game with this cool new mechanisms where you have cities on either side of you, and kind of you're partnering with either player on either side of you, but you're also competing to be the sole winner. And I was like, that sounds awesome. Do you have it here with you? Can I play it? And this was at Gen Con on the spot. I asked them if this game was available. They weren't even pitching it to me. They were just something they were working on. I asked them what they were working on, and we ended up publishing it. We've sold tens of thousands of copies of this game. A lot of this came because I just happened to meet Ben at a convention, and we were hanging out. I had a good time with him. I had a good impression of him. That's at a convention. A lot of the time that I spend and that publishers spend is online. We see comments on our website. We see comments on social media. We see comments in different groups on social media where people are talking about games and game design. I think this isn't necessary if this isn't your thing, but I think it really, really helps to get your name out there, get who you are out there well in advance of pitching a game to a publisher, so that when you do pitch a game to them, that they might recognize you, that there's a little bit of hope there, that they might say, okay, I remember that person. I played a game with them at a convention. I saw them giving positive, really constructive feedback to someone online, being generous online. I've seen them in the comments of our website. They clearly care about my company because they didn't just show up out of the blue to pitch a game. They've been following this company for a while. I know that from the comments. Things like that. Make yourself and the game known online and at events. And the other example I want to give there before I move on real quick is My Little Scythe. Because My Little Scythe wasn't originally pitched to us. My Little Scythe was a game that Hobie and his daughter created, and they just created a really beautiful prototype, and they shared that prototype in, I believe, the Scythe Facebook group and some other Facebook groups and on Board Game Geek. And people were just, Hobie was not pitching it to me at all. He just made this thing for fun and shared it with a bunch of people, and it got so much buzz and so many people were excited about it that it got my attention, and I wanted to try it as well. And so by actually putting even your actual game out there, not just you, but your game out there to share and talk about it, I think can make a huge difference in garnering the interest of publishers. It can actually cut out a lot of the steps that I'm going to mention below if you have such a great game that people are buzzed about, because the publisher might actually just go to you. You don't even have to pitch your game to the publisher. Part 4 preparation is to playtest and write a great rulebook. I kind of combine these things together. Again, it's part of the game design process, but this is crucially important if you are preparing to pitch your game to a publisher. The game has been playtested extensively, and that you have used those playtest results to write a great rulebook. And that basically I'm saying this because the rulebook is so key if you are going to share this game with a publisher. And if they can't understand the game from the rulebook, it's going to make a terrible first impression. Even if it's a fantastic game, but the rulebook is terrible, they're not going to have a good first impression of it, and they're going to give up on it rather quickly. I need to stress here that it is not your job in the end to write the final version of the rulebook, but being able to express how the game works in rules, in writing, is an important skill to hone and craft over time. I'm not going to go into how to do that here, but my quick tip here is read a bunch of other rule books. And when you sit down and write your rule book for the game, model it after rule books that have worked for you when you've learned a game, and then go test that rule book. Give it to someone to play the game using the rule book alone without your guidance at all, because they're going to give you a lot of feedback about things that you forgot, that you didn't mention in that rule book. Last, under preparation, make an attractive thematic final prototype. I think My Little Scythe is another fantastic example of this. Hobie made a really, really beautiful prototype. This might be, I put it at the end here because when you're pitching a game to publishers, you don't necessarily need that final prototype yet. You need to be ready to present it if the publisher asks for it. But usually when you're pitching a game to a publisher, you're not actually, the first thing that you're doing is not handing them a prototype. There are some other steps that you need to go through. But having an attractive thematic final prototype is really helpful. And You're not expected to be a graphic designer. You're not expected to go as a designer, as a game designer. You're not expected to go get great art for the game. That's the publisher's responsibility. But it needs to look decent on the table. It needs to be functional. So like whatever early prototypes you had where you were just writing down things on scraps of paper, that is not enough for a publisher. A publisher needs to have something that looks halfway decent. The user interface has been thought out at least a little bit and is functional for the publisher to actually play the game. And I think it helps too. Again, you should not go commission art as a designer submitting a game to a publisher, but you could pull some sample images from online, from the internet, and show them to the publisher just so they can get a feel for what the world is that you're trying to capture in the game. So if there's a really sense of place or world building to the game, if it's a game about, say, dragons, that you have a few images of the types of dragons that exist in this world, and you can pull those images offline. Just credit the artist there. You're not making any money off this. You're just sharing it with someone. Yeah, so that's my last step for preparation. Be prepared with a functional prototype that has a little glimpse of the thematic feel of the world and of the game. The next step, so that's preparation. The next step is selection, how you actually select the publishers that you're going to submit to, or that you're going to pitch to. The first thing that I recommend here is to select 10 publishers that you love. 10 publishers that you really love or admire. If you have a game collection, the best place that I think that you can start is to look at your collection and look at games or publishers for which you have more than one game. So that's probably a clear indication that you admire this publisher if you've bought more than one game from that publisher. There are also, maybe you don't own every game from a publisher, maybe you don't even own any games from a publisher that you really admire, but there are probably, hopefully, if you've done your market research in the first step, the preparation step, there are publishers that you think are doing a great job. And so find 10 of them. Pick 10 of those publishers. Next, look at each of those publishers' websites to see A, if they're accepting game submissions at all, because they may not be, and B, to look at their submission guidelines. Every publisher that is accepting game submissions has their own set of submission guidelines, specific things that they are looking for. And those guidelines may not meet what your game is. A publisher might be looking for a game that only plays at 2 players, and your game might be a game that plays up to 4 or 5 players. That's okay. That means that game isn't for that publisher. Don't try to force it in. That publisher is not looking for that type of game. And that's why you have 9 other publishers on this list, so you can see what types of games they want. There are thousands of publishers out there, so there are many publishers to choose from. So yeah, look carefully at those submission guidelines. And if you have questions, for a reason that I'll mention in a second, do not contact the publisher privately. Instead, post your questions publicly, hopefully on their submissions page if they have comments open on that page, or someplace else, some other public appropriate forum where it's appropriate for you to ask questions. Because those questions are probably questions that the publisher has gotten before, and they want to answer them in a way that can benefit other people who might have the same questions. Do not email them privately. The reason for that is the next step on this checklist, which is that you need to make a strategically good first impression on this publisher. And that might come at different times. It might come from a comment that you post on their website, just a random comment where you're talking about whatever the publisher is talking about on their website. It might come later on when you actually pitch the game. That might be your first contact too. That's okay too. But if whatever your first contact is, it might be a memorable one. The publisher might remember that this is the first time you came to them. And if it's you asking them for something private that you could have just asked publicly, you're basically taking away the publisher's time for yourself. It's a tough word to say out there, but it's a little selfish for you to say, okay, publisher, give me your private time right now, even though I haven't submitted a game to you yet, that type of thing. In the end, it might be mutually beneficial. You might submit an awesome game, which is good for the publisher, and they might accept the awesome game and publish a bunch of copies, which is good for you. But at this point in time, it's crucial to think about what first impression you want to make on that publisher. Do you want it to be about you? Do you want it to be a little selfish? Or do you want it to be not selfish or a part of your pitch, or generous if you want to show the publisher online that you were generous with your time and information? Whatever it is, just think about that first impression. If you haven't already made contact with a publisher, that first impression really, really does matter. And it might be the difference between a great pitch and a very poor pitch. Last, very importantly, during the selection process, Once you have a few publishers that you've decided to submit to, select one game that you are going to publish to each publisher. I mentioned this. I mean, it might be the case where you only have one game, and then this isn't part of the process. But there have been way too many times, in my experience, that a game designer has showed up at a pitch meeting at a convention, or they are presenting a pitch in some other way, maybe online, maybe through email, and they offer me a portfolio of games to choose from. And that is not what a publisher wants to see. A publisher wants to see that you have one specific game that you think is just perfect for that publisher. You've spent a lot of time and effort on this one specific game, and you've spent time and effort choosing this one publisher that you think is the perfect match for that game. That makes such a better first impression than going to a publisher and saying, hey, like, pick one of these three. Any of these three games could work. I like all three of these. Because A, it shows that you divided your time between a lot of different games, which is okay. It's okay for you to do that, but it's not a great part of the pitch. A publisher, like me, I am much more enamored by a designer who has put a lot of their time and attention and focus on one specific game and made that as great as possible, rather than just try to make as many different possible games. And the other part of it is that they have selected you specifically for this game. It feels good as a publisher, just as a person, like we're publishers or people, it feels good that you chose something specifically for us to pitch to us. That feels much better than saying, like, here's a basket of games, choose one of these games. So pick one game. If you have multiple games, pick one game and pitch that to each different publisher. Third, I had the submission step. So how you actually submit the game to a publisher. And the overarching answer to this, the real key, is to simply follow that publisher's submission guidelines. Every publisher will have slightly different submission guidelines on their website if they are open to submissions right now. Follow those guidelines. Follow those instructions. They're there for a reason. Don't think of yourself as the exception where you should do something different. So if those, like, for example, on our website, we have a form that you fill out. And the form goes through, it asks you some questions. It says, hey, does your game actually play from 2 to 5 players at least? Does your game actually play in this playing time? Have you actually play tested your game? It's a form that you fill out, and then you submit it, and we review that form. However, every now and then, I get a designer who approaches me in some different way, and it doesn't work as well, because we've put this time and effort into creating this form because this is what we've determined is the best way for us to receive game submissions. And if you were doing some other way, then right out of the gate, again, it comes back to that first impression. It's almost like you're saying, all the other designers can use that form. I'm special. I want to do this my way. Don't do that. It doesn't make a good first impression. The one small exception to this is if you have already established a relationship with that publisher through social media, through commenting on their website, through volunteering for that publisher, whatever your relationship is. After you follow their official submission guidelines, say it's a form like ours, then I think it is okay for you to also send that publisher a short email or send that contact at the publisher a quick email that says, hey, just want to give you a heads up. I finally submitted my game. My game is in your submission process. Thanks for whatever. Just wanted to let you know it's there. Nothing else other than that. Don't put pressure on them to go check it out. If they're interested, they'll check it out. But I think that's a little helpful because, for example, at Stonemaier Games, the person who reviews those form submissions is Alan. It is not me, my co-founder, Alan. Whereas I'm the one that's out there on social media, on this YouTube channel and whatnot. You may have had contact with me. You probably have not had direct contact with Alan. And so if you ever submit a game to Stonemaier Games and you already have some form of relationship with me, it's actually helpful for me after you submit the game to send me just a quick note to say, I submitted the game to you. And that's it. Just leave it at that. That way I know if I want to act on it, I can. If not, that's okay too. But at least then I know that you've submitted it. Within that, so that's the biggest thing in the submission category. That's everything right there. Follow the publisher's submission guidelines. But there are a few other little steps here to think about. One way, if you are pitching your game to a publisher, to help them anchor what the game is without them knowing much about it, is to compare it to 2 other games, but with a twist. You may have seen this with like movie pitches, where like someone might say, okay, this movie is Jurassic Park meets Speed. I don't know what that would look like. I kind of want to watch that movie now that I said that off the cuff. But so you're kind of pitching those two things together. With a game, you might say, okay, this is Architects of the West Kingdom meets Azul. And then add a twist to it and say, and the twist to it is this thing. And that right away anchors my first. It goes back to that first impression. It anchors like what the general concept of the game is without me needing to know anything more. And one little trick to this, if you want to know the trick, is know what types of games that publisher likes. If that publisher, like I just mentioned 2 games that I like. I really like Architects of the West Kingdom. I really like Azul. If you know that, then using those games as examples when you're trying to use this approach, this technique to pitch in a game can be very effective. It doesn't have to be. There might be plenty of publishers out there that don't put out their favorite game list, and then you're just going to pick 2 games for this purpose that do truly match the theme mechanisms of your game. But if you do happen to know that, that is a big win in your pocket there, to pick 2 games that you happen to know that the publisher already enjoys. Also, a key part of the pitch process is to highlight the hooks in the game. So the hook of a game, there are many different hooks in a game. I talk about this in terms of like, it's great if a game has a thematic hook. So something that's a little unique about the theme. So maybe it's Jurassic Park, but it's in the future. So a little twist on a theme that we already know. There can be a component hook. Having a component hook is really helpful. So you have this game and you have this really cool component that is used in a unique way. Or maybe it has been used in a game before, but it is at least a component that you think players will be excited about, because if they are, the publisher is probably going to be excited about that too. And also mention a mechanical hook. What is the one really, really cool mechanism that you haven't really seen in other games that you think is really, really cool? I think that's worth mentioning. Mention those hooks, and mention 3 of them. I'd pick 3. I think more than that is too many. Too few isn't going to hook the publisher, but pick 3 hooks and mention them to the publishers. The 3 things that you think that you are really excited about, and that you might think that they're going to be excited about too. Because that way the publisher can already think about how they're going to market this game, the reasons that the game is more marketable than a game without a great hook. And this goes into 2 other little subtopics real quick. One is consider the budget a little bit when you're pitching that. So if you do have a component hook, but that it might cost a lot of money, then you might say, okay, here's my big budget version of this component, and here's an alternative version of it that's still a nice component hook, but I don't think will cost as much for you to make. And also the sell sheet. A lot of game designers create a nice sell sheet for a game. That outlines kind of the different highlights of the game, shows what the prototype looks like, things like that. That is very helpful in one circumstance that I can think of, and that is conventions. It's really helpful to have a sell sheet at conventions. You can leave that with a publisher at a convention. If you've just finished pitching a game to a publisher, you can leave them with that sell sheet for them to have in hand to remember what the game is all about. Even just the act of creating a sell sheet might be helpful for you as you're going through your pitch, as you're preparing for your pitch, but I don't think it's really necessary for many publishers. So think about that. Last, the final step for submission is to sell yourself a little bit. You are part of this. You are someone that the publisher is going to work with for quite some time on this game, and I think it's worth selling yourself and selling who you are. You might mention your design experience. It's okay if you have none. That's okay. First-time designer. That's a sell right there, that you're a first-time designer. But also if you've published 10 games, that's a sell too. If there's something unique about you that you think is important for the publisher to know as they're already starting to think about marketing this game, mention it. It's okay to mention those things, whether it's an element of diversity, if you're really old or really young, if you're an ethnicity that is underrepresented in the game industry, same with gender or sexuality, anything that is different, that highlights you, that makes you special and unique, mention it here. This is the place to sell yourself. And last, sell your commitment to playtesting. I think this is crucially important, because if a publisher accepts your game, that is really the start of the process. That is not your end of the process for most publishers. You will then embark on a journey of improving the game with the publisher to make it as good as possible. And not all publishers work this way, but I think more and more publishers do work that way, where they actively work with the designer for an extended period of time. And your commitment to playtesting is really helpful. Really, really helpful. So I think that's a nice selling point if you are willing to put that out there. All right, we're finally on to step 4, which is the conclusion. What happens next? This is probably the shortest step, because you've done the pitch now. You've finished the pitch. You've submitted your game. Now you just kind of have to wait patiently. And I do want to stress that. Please wait patiently, because if you've submitted a game to a publisher, it is, well, I would say this in the best way possible, because games are the lifeblood of publishers. We need to publish games to survive and thrive. They're really, really important. But at the moment of submission, of the game submission, the game pitch, your game is probably the lowest on that publisher's priority list of the many, many things that they are doing to run their business. So please keep that in mind and wait patiently if possible, but do so with respect to yourself. Your time is valuable too, in a different way than the publisher. Publisher has different priorities. You have your own priorities. You are your own priority, and that's great. That's important. And so it's okay for you to submit your game to multiple publishers. Or if you've waited a few weeks and you haven't heard anything from a publisher, then you could submit your game to other publishers. That's okay. Be transparent about it if you are submitting your game to multiple publishers, but it is okay for you to do that. The one big thing here is, though, don't badger a publisher to get back to you. If they are interested in your game, they will get back to you. It's kind of goes to the rule of relationships. If you go on a date with someone and they are interested in you, you will probably hear from them. You will hear back from them. The same goes with the publisher. If you pitch them a game that they are really interested in following up on, when they are available, they will follow up with you on that game. And in the meantime, again, also respect yourself. If you don't hear back from a publisher in a while, move on. Move on to a different publisher. Focus on different publishers. You have every right to do that. That is well within your rights to do that, and I hope you respect yourselves by doing that. Part 2 of this is to prepare for the next step. So if things go well, if the publisher is intrigued, but they maybe need some more information, as they probably will, prepare for those steps. So you might create a video overview of the game. So showing like a 5 or 10 minute video showing a publisher what the game is all about. That might be helpful for a publisher for the next steps. Get ready for constructive criticism. So be emotionally healthy and mentally healthy. Be ready for a publisher to come back to you and say, hey, here's some criticism for this game, so that you can show that you are open to it and that you can reply in a healthy way to that criticism. And also prepare that really nice fancy prototype. If you haven't already done that, now's the time to really get that nice prototype ready in case the publisher says that they want you to send them the prototype. This might be a tabletop version of a cardboard version of it. It also might be a digital version of it on Tabletopia. So you might want to have both ready in case the publisher prefers one over the other. That might be in their submission guidelines, but be ready to submit a prototype for that publisher if they are interested in learning more. Now, there are 2 things that will then arise. Your game will either be rejected or it will be accepted. If it is rejected, I highly recommend, even though it stings, it hurts, I highly recommend that you accept that rejection with grace. And the reason why I think this is so important, if it's not obvious, is that the publisher might not want this game of yours, but they might want a future game of yours, or you might have a future game of yours that you want this publisher to consider. And if you leave a really bad impression, if you slam the door behind you as you go, they're not going to consider you anymore. That is not a great exit strategy for accepting rejection. So please accept it with grace. What we have found is that many designers are curious why we did not accept their game. And I think it's important to keep in mind that it is not the publisher's job to give you constructive feedback. That is your playtester's job. That is not the publisher's job. And also, I think oftentimes what I've seen is that the designer doesn't actually want feedback. They, like in the instances over the years, a couple dozen instances where I have offered the designer constructive feedback, I think it's gone well like once, and this is with a rejection, with us saying we're not interested in your game, but for whatever reason at that time I decided to offer some constructive criticism. But it has very, very rarely gone well. Usually, as it turns out, the designer wasn't looking for feedback; they were looking for affirmation, and that's okay. It's okay to do that, but don't ask for constructive criticism if you are not in a place where you actually want that constructive criticism. And part of that means that if the designer somehow takes the time to give you constructive criticism, that you respond properly. That you don't respond with more questions, but you respond with more than just like, oh, okay, thanks. Like, that's pretty much every email that I've ever gotten to a detailed constructive criticism email. Instead, it would be really nice if, again, it goes back to that impression. This is almost your final impression. If a publisher does somehow take the time to give you some constructive criticism, write them back and show them that you do some active listening in an email to show them that you have listened to their feedback and that you will act on it, or that you will think about it at least. That goes so much farther than a quick email saying like, oh, okay, all right, see ya. Goes so much farther than that. But also, probably don't ask for feedback. Again, that isn't the publisher's job to offer you feedback. If you want to ask anything, I would say make it very, very specific. So either ask a very specific question about your game, or ask for one thing. Say, what is one thing I could do to improve my game? I think that's a fair question to ask. And then respect the publisher if they choose not to answer, because again, it still is not their job. And also, one other question that I get during rejections is, would you recommend some other, so this is the designer asking me, would you recommend some other publishers for me to submit this game to? And this is, again, not a good first impression, because you are asking a publisher or you're asking another person really to do your work for you. Instead, go back up to this selection step that I mentioned in this video. It is your job to select publishers that you think are a good fit. It is your job to know those publishers, to know the market, to do your research. It is not the publisher's job, especially not the publisher who is rejecting your game. It is not their job to matchmake for you. That's not their job. So I'm saying this for your benefit. I'm not saying this to rant at all, really. I'm saying this for your benefit as a designer. If you want to make a final good impression after a rejection, don't ask the publisher to do work for you. It's not their job. Just don't do that. And you will end in a much better tone and significantly increase your chances of going back to that publisher with a different game in the future. Finally, the good news. What if you get good news? What if the publisher is interested and you're ready for those next steps and they accept the game? I'm not going to go into it too detailed here, but this is where you need to know your rights as a designer and what a game design contract looks like. I've included a link in the description below of an article that I've written that shows what a Stonemaier Games designer contract looks like. Use that. I think it's a fair, solid foundation for contract. And so have that in mind when you're talking to a designer about what the next, or to a publisher about what the next steps are and what your contract with them might look like. Oh man, I meant to highlight more games in this video because we have more games. So Between Two Castles, here, I'll tell a few stories here at the end because that's the final part of the conclusion. So Between Two Castles actually came from the same designers of Between Two Cities because they followed up with me after Between Two Cities was a success, and they said, is there something else that we could design maybe in this world with this mechanism? I think I mentioned castles to them offhand as a theme that I liked, the idea of building two castles, and they ran with it and designed this game. So that's an example of publishers who already have their foot in the door, or designers who already have the foot in the door of a publisher, following up and wanting to do more with that publisher. For Wingspan, just some quick stories about Wingspan. So Wingspan was a game that Elizabeth submitted to us back in 2016. I believe 2016 is the right year. And we met with her. I met with Elizabeth at Gen Con of that year and had a quick 30-minute pitch. And one of the things that I loved about Elizabeth right off the bat and about the game is, or two things really, that she really demonstrated her ability to design tons of unique, thematic, mechanically unique cards. That, I think, is a tough design skill to have, and she demonstrated it from the start. And I loved how Elizabeth was open to constructive criticism. Right off the bat, if you're having an in-person pitch at a convention, you've got to be on your game for constructive criticism because the publisher is testing you. They're trying to see if you are open to constructive criticism. And Elizabeth was the perfect mix between hearing that constructive criticism, considering it, writing it down, but also at the right time pushing back a little bit and saying, I tried that, it didn't work, and it didn't work when I tried it. But thank you for the feedback, because that's true too. Publishers don't want designers that are just going to say yes to everything, because you know the game much better than the publisher. Elizabeth was great for that. Also, after that initial pitch, we didn't accept Wingspan right away. We kind of went through a process with Elizabeth where she took some of our feedback and worked on the game a little bit more, honed it a little bit, and then I think it was like one or two times back and forth where she sent us a submission, a revised version of the game, and we offered some feedback. So from the start, I knew there was something there. I just didn't think it was right at the place where we were ready to forge ahead with the publishing process. And Elizabeth was great to work with during that time until we officially signed the game. So yeah, that's a little bit of Wingspan. And finally, the other game that we have so far is Pendulum. And Pendulum was an example where the designer Travis Jones showed up at Stonemaier Games Design Day. So we host a game design event every year where designers come and just kind of playtest their games. Some of them are looking for publishers, some of them are not. They're just looking to playtest their games. And Travis happened to be looking for a publisher, and but he didn't pitch the game to us at the event. Rather, he just showed up with a game that he had spent a lot of time on, and it went over really well with attendees at this event, where he knew that we were going to be there, and went over really well, and that caught our eye when we saw that people were really highly rating this game. And so that's why we pursued the game. So this goes back to the idea of making yourself and your presence and your game known whether it's online or at events where you know the publisher or publishers are going to be there, where the publishers are paying attention. That can make a big difference and can make your job to pitch the game a lot easier in the end. I know that's a lot to cover. I said 4 steps, but it took 35 minutes here. But thank you for bearing with me. Hopefully this was helpful for you in learning how to better pitch your game to publishers. And I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below, whether you have experience pitching games to publishers and you have some tips that you'd like to offer to other designers, or if you are a publisher who has been pitched and has some advice that you'd like to offer to people as well. And you can also share your stories below. Ideally, we keep them constructive. I know it can be, there's a negative side to this for sure, but hopefully you can keep this constructive and frame your comment in a way that you think will help other game designers. And you can also ask any questions you want in the comments below. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thanks.